welcome to ClojureBridge in practice. I'm Kath, I'm a data engineer at Simple. It's my email address, that is my Twitter handle.
I'm Anna, I'm a software developer at Walmart Labs. You can find me on Twitter using that Twitter handle and on any other social media platform using my first and last name. So what is a ClojureBridge? It's a community effort to encourage more women who are new to software development or new to Clojure to learn Clojure. We provide weekend workshops worldwide. Workshops are free to attend with venue, food, and everything else provided by the sponsors. Workshops are organized by the local communities, but the curriculum, all the organizing materials are developed in collaboration by everyone who's involved in ClojureBridge all around the world.
So ClojureBridge was started in late 2013, and the first workshops were in 2014 in Durham and San Francisco, and they're based on the RailsBridge model of programming workshops. So if you're at all familiar with Rails, you might have heard of them. They're like a Friday evening install fest where everyone gets together and eats free food and installs their dev environment, and then they come back the Saturday after, and they spend the entire day learning Clojure. There's also now Bridge Foundry, which is sort of like a nonprofit organization that serves as like an umbrella for stuff like ClojureBridge and RailsBridge, and I think like AngularBridge and GoBridge and other stuff like that, where if people are really interested in a certain programming language and they want to bring more diversity to the community, they can start their own bridge. And it provides resources like advisors and help finding sponsors, sort of regardless of what you work in.
So what exactly does ClojureBridge do? Well, just like this cat, we make magic happen. Well, not really. We work on curriculum. We are slowly developing various versions of learning materials, trying to target different levels of programming skills. We teach volunteers, teachers, and TAs how to organize workshops in an inclusive, supportive environment. We organized workshops all around the world, and every ClojureBridge chapter shares their experience with everyone else in the community, so we're constantly working on improving, developing curriculum, making everything better.
So at ClojureBridge, we started our workshops by developing a custom curriculum. Like Anna mentioned, we do curriculum development as a community, so if you go to github.com/ClojureBridge/curriculum, you can see all the stuff that we use in our workshops, and you can contribute to it yourself. And there are a lot of ways to volunteer time with ClojureBridge. A lot of them involve doing face-to-face things. So if that is not your scene for some reason, you can go along and you can also like write and file issues, and we're super jazzed to have that also. And one of the frequent questions that people ask me at conferences is sort of why bother writing our own curriculum, especially because over the past few years, a lot of books and other things have been developed to teach people like beginner level Clojure from scratch. And that is true, that there are a lot of books that people can learn from, but a big part of ClojureBridge is that we develop things as a community, and aside from just sort of like teaching a workshop, we like teach people in the community how to teach their own inclusive workshops. So the existing resources out there aren't quite as inclusive as we'd like to strive for. And I felt like an exercise of this was I went and I looked at like 38 different Clojure books on Amazon, which was as many I could find that weren't self-published. And I looked at every edition and checked to see like who the authors were. And I read the first few pages and I looked at their bios and checked to see what pronouns they used for themselves. And out of 38, there was one who didn't call themselves he, which was not super encouraging given that we teach workshops for women. So I thought there are also ways to contribute to books other than writing them yourself. So I thought I'd go through the acknowledgements pages and see how many times an author of a book thought to ask a woman what they thought of the thing that they were writing. And out of like 232 times, it was someone who went by he. None of those times it was someone who went by she, which is also not super encouraging. So I think there's more than enough justification for like writing our own curriculum. If we're teaching workshops for people who aren't men, then we should be considering input from people who aren't men as we're writing our lesson plans. And yeah, there are a few different parts of the ClojureBridge curriculum. There's the teacher's guide, which explains to people who are teaching a workshop how to actually use the curriculum. There's the setup guide, which gives instructions for attendees how to set up their Clojure dev environment. There's the core curriculum, which is like the basics of Clojure. And then there's the capstone application. So we have a few different ones that at the end of a workshop, students can sit down and figure out how to use the things they just learned in practice. And like Anna said, right now, the curriculum is beginner level, but we're trying to like develop intermediate and slightly more advanced ones as well, so people can come back and keep learning every time. And yeah, like I mentioned, there are a few different capstone apps. One of them is Turtle Swap, which is sort of like using a library that's Clojure Turtle to draw like line-based graphics using a turtle like in logo. One of them is Snowflakes, which is like animated snowflakes falling using Quill. Another one is Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, so you can learn how to like make music using overtone. And then there's a global growth application, which is like the basics of web development in Clojure. And Caesar Cipher, which is a shorter exercise that's like building a Caesar cipher and practicing like string and character manipulation in Clojure. So the ClojureBridge curriculum includes a lot of things, but who actually writes the curriculum? It's these people and possibly more. These are as many people as I could find by just sort of like going through all of the repositories that are Clojure related and like in the ClojureBridge organization that we use in our workshops, and these are people who sort of like contributed directly to those. So thank you to those people, since some of them are like actually physically here right now. And this is an example of someone who's contributed to the curriculum, which is Longo, who is sitting there, and he is now waving. He wrote Clojure Turtle, which is the library that we use for the Turtles Walk capstone I mentioned earlier. He said that he initially helped teach San Francisco's ClojureBridge workshop in 2014 because he got interested in teaching Clojure because he was teaching Tamil already. And he originally heard about ClojureBridge when he was teaching his own Clojure workshop at this big event in Oakland every year called Oakland Workshop Weekend, where people sort of like teach free, sometimes like tech-related workshops, and people in the community come in and get to learn new things. So he heard about one of the hosts there, that a ClojureBridge was happening, and he really wanted to help out. So he said, my main intention in getting involved was to pitch into the effort. I wanted to do my part to help ClojureBridge, a beginner's Clojure workshop that has great Clojure community support, to be able to get off the ground and be successful in the early stages. And of course, he totally agrees with the overall goal of increasing diversity in the Clojure community. So then Clojure West 2015 happened, and he gave a really good presentation on programming Clojure in Tamil, which there are like links to that presentation in the slide deck. And he also saw a talk from Yoko Harada, who is one of the other like board members of ClojureBridge, and she helps with the curriculum and recruits sponsors and like helps with the website and does basically everything. And she talked about how teaching functions is the hardest part of ClojureBridge workshops a lot of the time. So Alongo decided to help out. He said he was thinking of writing a version of Logo written in Clojure, and then he and I ran into each other on the subway one evening, and he realized that it could probably be used in ClojureBridge workshops. So he prioritized it as a side project, and then chose Quill for rendering because Bridget Hillier, who was also somewhere here at the conference, she started ClojureBridge. She was really enthusiastic about it because we're already using it in some of our workshops. And yeah, now the library gets used in ClojureBridge workshops. This is a tweet from Sarah Vessels, who attended ClojureBridge Kentucky last September, and she is making pretty flowers using Clojure Turtle, and that was her final project. So yeah, if you're interested in writing lesson plans, let us know. And
so, who watches the waters, or if you're not a Star Trek fan, who's making sure that everything goes well? Here's a sample to-do list for someone who's organizing ClojureBridge workshop. It doesn't look very inviting, does it? And even if you organized workshops before, you probably could use some help. Fortunately, there's lots of help. First of all, there's a ClojureBridge workshop Google group where people post their questions, they post their advice. their post about their experience, their reports from workshops that were completed. And there's also mentorship, sponsorship assistance, and TA training. Here are the mentors. You can find them on Twitter or on the mailing list. Mentors are basically members of the ClojureBridge board who organized workshops themselves. They can guide you through the whole process of organizing workshop. And even if you organized an event before, we strongly encourage you to keep us in the loop anyway, because we want to make sure that everything goes smoothly, that organizing workshops is not a painful experience, so that you organize them again, and hopefully again and again, until your whole town or city is programming in Clojure. There's also an organizing guide. It's open source, it's available on GitHub. It's pretty much a collection of notes on how to tackle all the stuff that needs to be done. If someone has some experience in organizing events, then the minimum viable workshop describes what exactly is needed for a workshop to qualify as ClojureBridge workshop. So, for example, there's teacher training, there's the Install Fest, that's usually on Friday, and there's actual workshop that's on Saturday. Then there's workshop planning timeline, which explains what specific tasks need to be done, how many weeks or days in advance. The organizing guide gives you also a sample budget and templates for all the email communications that you might need, which is super useful. And there's also a small section about class level grouping and information on how to tackle that subject. Money stuff. I don't think many of you like to handle money, and well, I'm actually glad, because otherwise I would probably be at a banking conference, not Clojure conference. And I'm pretty sure that just the thought of finding sponsors, arranging payments, sounds pretty scary to some. You might exchange some transactions, set up a bank account, and then, I don't know, get into trouble with the taxman, and you probably want to avoid that. The easiest solution to that is to have sponsors pay for things directly. And that's all fine and well if you have some contacts, if there's someone who you can reach out to. If you live in an area that's rich in tech companies, then you probably know someone, you have contacts. But not everyone is so lucky, and fortunately we can help with that. We can introduce you to some companies, we can give you advice on fundraising. Here's a list of all previous sponsors. These amazing companies very often helped us organize more than one event. They provided venues, sometimes their employees were also the volunteers. Big thank you to everyone on this list, because if it wasn't for you, nothing we are doing would have happened otherwise. So after you found your mentor, after you found your sponsors, it's time to set up teacher training, teacher and TA training. This event is intended for people who's never been a TA or a teacher before, or for folks who TA'd before but not taught and would like to teach in the future, or for anyone who feels a little bit shaky about the prospect of doing it again about teaching. Basically, the aim is to go over some general teaching concepts and the core ClojureBridge values, and comparing how this affects, how this influences the instructional style that you should use when you're teaching the workshop. The material we use is the same material used by RailsBridge. The link is on that slide as well. TA training is also a great opportunity to go through any problems that people are anticipating, any worries that your volunteers might have. It's also a great chance to just get to know each other better and make sure that everyone is on the same page. Here's one of the examples of how volunteers prepared themselves for the actual event. no last though organized ClojureBridge in Austin, the local Austin Clojure meetup, dedicated one of their monthly hack days to work through the curriculum, and they played around with the light table as well. This gave them a chance to make sure that everything worked, and they ironed out everything that didn't. Basically, it's important to dedicate some time to familiarize yourself with the material that you're going to work on. And if you spend some time fixing some things that you find that are broken, everyone else in the community will benefit from that.
So yeah, once you've organized a workshop, you inevitably have to actually teach it. We've had 33 workshops so far over the past about 2 years, which was 24 cities across 8 countries with about 22 attendees a workshop, which is about 720 ClojureBridge attendees so far. But across all of those workshops, we've gotten a lot of the same few questions from organizers, in particular, who should teach the workshop, how much experience should teachers have, and where do TAs come from even? So as far as who should teach the workshop, we say ideally it should be a woman, because it's sort of a woman-oriented workshop, but possibly not if there aren't that many lady Clojure devs around. I tried to find a GIF that was a GIF of a cat leading things, and this was the closest I could get. I think it is entertaining nonetheless. One of the goals of ClojureBridge is to create spaces that are led by people who are underrepresented in tech. So if there are women excited to volunteer, we sort of seed whichever positions they would enjoy doing to them, which often means teaching and TAing roles. And then if not, sometimes they'd rather TA or organize other than lead the class. So in those cases, we are really jazzed to have other volunteers. As far as how much experience teachers should have, teachers come from a lot of different backgrounds. Some of them are really experienced teachers, some of them are programmers who don't really teach or do anything public facing at all most of the time. And we also have people who are relatively new to Clojure, but enjoy talking to people. And to be honest, as long as you're familiar with the concepts that are actually in the curriculum and you go through the exercises a few times, it's generally fine and you're good to teach. So this is an example of one of our TAs. Elena is an associate professor of computer science at the University of Minnesota in Morris. I think several of her students are here at this conference this year. She TA'd for ClojureBridge workshops in Minnesota and Boston, and she also gave a talk at last year's Clojure West on adapting Clojure for an intro-level computer science classroom, which that is the talk, and there's a link in the corner in the slides. Rest assured, not all ClojureBridge TAs and teachers are professors of computer science, but when I was talking with her, she said really good things about teaching and had really insightful responses, so I wanted to share them with you. In particular, some of the ClojureBridge teachers and TAs previously TA'd for courses in grad school, or they worked in a classroom vaguely at some point, and they're really jazzed to get back into the classroom for a day. But there are some differences between teaching for K-12 or university and then teaching for ClojureBridge. And as Elena puts it, there's no goal of teaching specific concepts and no assessment. The goal is to give students a feel for programming, a better understanding of what approaches and skills this activity requires, and hopefully to make them feel that they have or can acquire those skills. Also, hopefully to let the students have fun with programming and experience joy of accomplishing a task. The exact details of what those tasks are matter less, and students often surprise me by trying challenges that I didn't even think of. So in other words, the goal of a ClojureBridge workshop isn't necessarily to set benchmarks and make sure people meet them. ClojureBridge workshops shouldn't be a big rush. If you don't get finished, that's fine. And in fact, people shouldn't even necessarily feel like they've finished anything, because the goal of a ClojureBridge workshop is to teach new community members the basics, teach them how to get started, and make them feel welcome to come back and learn more later. And as part of TAing and organizing for ClojureBridge, Elena also spent some time recruiting other volunteers to help teach the workshop. One of the frequent barriers new organizers face is figuring out how to find TAs who aren't men. Existing Clojure user groups are usually very friendly, as is everyone at the conference, but they also tend to be predominantly male. So one of the key points of ClojureBridge is to create a learning environment for women, so you should try first to go out into the community and find women who can TA. Elena said her strategy for this was to reach out to folks that she met at Clojure West and Clojure Conj. If you happen to have college students or staff in your user group, or there's a college nearby, you can reach out to them, and upper level students are often really jazzed to help teach people programming. And all women's colleges, she said, are especially really helpful because all the computer science students there are women. And we do also try to get previous students to come back and TA after they have come as an attendee, which is the more sustainable path to doing this. And finally, Helena's most valuable takeaway from teaching the workshop was seeing people discover that they can do things that seem so foreign to them. It turned out that most of the attendees at her workshops learned functional programming concepts like higher order functions and recursion pretty naturally. And even though she was skeptical at first about how feasible it would be to teach a one-day, like actually beginner level workshop in Clojure, she found that it worked really well. So now it's the community's job to keep developing materials and contributing their time.
So what happens after the workshop? While you're organizing and later running the workshop, you're working against time constraints, against the rush to get everything done in time. So once it's over, you just want to sit back, relax, forget about everything. You think you're done, but you're not. Well, at least you shouldn't be. We strive to make every ClojureBridge workshop better than the last one. So running a retrospective with your volunteers is a really great idea, and it's getting more and more popular among the organizers. It gives everyone a chance to go through everything that happened. We also ask our students for feedback on the workshop. So after the event, we send out an anonymous exit survey asking them how we did. The summaries are usually published on the ClojureBridge workshop mailing list. We tend to reuse the same questions. We store them in the organizing guide on GitHub. Here are some quotes from the survey. So ClojureBridge is all about inclusive, supportive environment and flexible curriculums, the environment where you're not being given some material and left alone to try and figure it out yourself. So it looks like we're doing a good job in this area, but of course there's always room for improvement. I'm going to give you a moment to read that. We always ask the students about the things that they think we should change. Lots of stuff comes up during the workshop, but also through the survey. There are many pain points around tooling, around writing better curriculums that target different levels of programming skills. So this is where we need help, and since all materials are open source, it's really easy for any of you to lend us a hand. And if you've noticed the last two quotes, they talk about lack of follow-up activities. So students go to this really cool event, they learn about Clojure, and then they may or may not know what to do next. Like, what do I do? Where do I search for more materials? Where do I find like-minded people? Are there any events that I can attend? How do I sign up for them? So organizers very often create attendee mailing lists to help them with the communication that they send out when they're organizing the event. So it's good to just reuse that mailing list and send out occasional email about a local Clojure meetup, about a conference, about opportunity grants, and maybe even compile a list of some useful resources that they could use, your students could use to just carry on learning Clojure. I sometimes hear people say they, meaning women, should make the effort to learn that language on their own, to try and find resources on their own if they're really serious about programming, that they should maybe not prove themselves, but like that we shouldn't have to reach out to someone who's really serious about the thing that they want to do. And I don't agree with that. I don't think we should be expecting anyone to reach out to us. We shouldn't make our community into this special club where people don't feel welcome, they don't feel invited. A few years ago, if I went to a tech meetup, I usually was the only woman in that event. And if I were lucky, maybe I was doubling the women presence in that room. But if you look around us today, at Clojure West, there are over 60 women. So I think reaching out to minorities really pays off. Here's a very cool thing that the organizers of ClojureBridge in Berlin do. They have this weekly learners group that is about 10 people. Every event starts in a very relaxed atmosphere with a potluck and a chat, and then they form groups and hack on stuff. Sometimes these are one-off hacks, sometimes longer-running projects. They have a Tumblr with some art pieces that they created using Clojure. But on top of that, they changed their regular Clojure meetups to make them more beginner-friendly. So they're now more accessible to ClojureBridge alumni, and the result is that the turn-up to those events is just more diverse. And one last thing, let's not forget why we're doing this, why we want more women and more other minorities in tech. We want to make our workplaces more diverse. And we can't do that if we don't hire. So if you happen to be hiring an entry-level Clojurist or someone who's programming in other languages but is Clojure curious, looking among ClojureBridge alumni is a really good idea. There are also other women in tech groups like Lambda Ladies, or if you don't know who you should contact, but you'd like to post your job advertisement somewhere, you can always contact someone from the ClojureBridge and we'll help you out. That's all. Thank you. If you have any questions, it's time to ask.
Hi, I looked on your website and I couldn't see any events currently listed. Is that just because it hasn't been updated, or do you guys have any events planned anywhere?
I don't think there are any events taking place right now. I think the last event was in Seattle last week. Yes.
Okay, cool.
I don't think there are any events happening in the nearest future.
Yeah, we also, so if you go on like the GitHub, so if you go to like Clojure or github.com/ClojureBridge, there's a repository there where we file issues. I think it's like /workshops, and people who are in like the process of organizing something will open an issue there, so you can go through and see the cities where people are currently working on it. We don't post them on the website until they create an Eventbrite page for it. Okay, we will be around. There's there's one now.
Okay, there's one.
Yeah.
Stories of people who started out in ClojureBridge and then sort of ended up getting hired as engineers either in Clojure or otherwise?
Yes. So I learned Clojure through ClojureBridge, and I got hired by someone I met at Clojure West or ClojureConf like a year and a half ago or something. Also, there's at least one person I know from the San Francisco workshop who started out, actually, like she went through boot camp like I did, and then went to ClojureBridge and was interested in functional programming. And now she ended up interning at several places. I think her first job was actually doing Scala development though. And now I'm not sure what she works in now.
She's actually at SlamData.
Yes, she is at SlamData doing Scala. So sometimes they end up with Clojure jobs, sometimes other functional languages and things. I don't think we've actually sat down and like counted to see how many are working professionally in Clojure yet. Yes.
Are there a lot of return visitors? And like how frequently do these happen?
The question was, are there any return visitors and how frequently do these happen? It depends on the city because it's always done by local organizers. Sometimes people will organize one and then sort of like hope for the best. Some people are like in Berlin where they organize ones very regularly. It just like depends on the city. I think in Minnesota we've had like 2 so far, and then they're organizing a 3rd one right now. I think in Austin we had 1, and now they're in the process of organizing a 2nd one too this year.
Okay. But is it common for people to keep going back to these, or has it not been enough?
It is. So it's not common for students to come back as students the next time. There have been some cases where students come in the first time and then come into TA like subsequent ones. Yes, we don't have like an intermediate or advanced level curriculum right now. So for the most part, it's like if you come to ClojureBridge, you're a beginner at the thing that we are teaching you. And then subsequent workshops often will use the same curriculum, so it makes more sense to have them TA versus come in as a student. Yes.
Are there
or welcoming and better for women?
Do you want to talk about it or should I talk about it? Okay. So the curriculum for ClojureBridge was written specifically to teach like women's workshops. It's not necessarily that we have stuff in there that's better for women. I think we pay attention to like the verbiage we use a lot more. I don't think there's anything like inherently about the stuff that we use in workshops that's like gendered. It's mostly just like if you read the stuff that we use in workshops or you see us use our stuff in workshop, it does like look different, but most of the time it's like the lack of a gender is in it. I think we spend a lot more time like removing assumptions and stuff from it because we assume people know nothing when they're coming to this workshop. So we try harder to make that true, I think. And because we use it like explicitly in workshops, every time someone teaches a workshop and something doesn't go well, we end up changing it almost directly after. So yes, back there.
What would you say is the most surprising thing you've learned as you've been developing these ClojureBridge workshops?
Try.
If you have something on top of your mind.
The question was, what is the most surprising thing that you found while developing ClojureBridge workshops? I think for me, like I went to a boot camp, but ultimately I was mostly self-taught and I was working like professionally as a functional programmer before I started getting involved with ClojureBridge. And I think what was surprising to me was like what a big difference like the fact that people were explicitly trying to welcome people made. I think when I was first learning how to do functional programming, it wasn't through something like this. And I would go to meetups and I didn't feel like I was supposed to be there and no one actually said anything otherwise. And it makes a big difference to just sort of like explicitly tell people that they belong there. And I think how big of a difference that makes is what is so surprising, that it's not just like a me thing, it's like it helps everyone for the most part to do that. Do you have something?
Well, it's a bit different, but I got a few responses, few emails from other ClojureBridge organizers about the things they were surprised about, and they all agreed that surprising was the fact that Clojure is a really good language to learn programming, to start learning from programming from. If you're coming from another language, especially if it's object-oriented programming language, you probably think that Clojure is probably not a good idea to start learning programming. It's just the opposite. So that was something that I found really surprising.
Any other questions? Okay, then, oh wait, now there's one more. Every time.
So, am I correct, you guys use light table? Is that what you guys use for?
Yes, so we've been using light table until I think very recently, meaning like on the order of a couple weeks recently. Light table before had like the Insta-REPL built in, so it was super easy for workshops, or like not super easy, it was relatively easy to like get people started because there wasn't as much for them to hold in their head in terms of like starting a dev environment. Like once they had it set up, it was fairly easy to keep going. I'm not sure if people are still using light table. Some are still using it. Sorry?
It had it no longer.
So it's not default included anymore. So it's a thing that you apparently have to like install separately, and sad face, but yeah.
But we're starting to use Night, so...
Yes, I think now people are starting to use like Night code is a thing that people use.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
What do you think makes Clojure a good choice for absolutely just like any specific reasons?
There's not much in terms of syntax that you have to learn. So you're just learning the concepts. You're not learning everything that's around it.
I think the fact that we deal with data directly is just a lot more direct than explaining, well, your data has to be wrapped in some sort of object that limit access.
Also, to repeat the thing that just happened, someone asked what makes like Clojure a good thing for beginners, and David Chambers, who also volunteers for ClojureBridge and is on the ClojureBridge board, he was not just like irrelevantly jumping in just then, mentioned that is who that was. He was saying that it's sort of easier to introduce people to how to manipulate data because you don't have to sort of like wrap it in objects and classes and things, and you can just sort of like manipulate things more directly. The person in the back.
Do you think it's the lispness of Clojure that makes it great for beginners? Because I know at some other universities they like to teach Racket. Do you like have an opinion on Clojure versus Racket for beginners? Like, do you think one might be better than the other?
So to repeat the question, someone in the audience was asking whether we think it's like the Lisp syntax that makes it useful to teach to beginners, and if so, if we have an opinion on like Racket versus Clojure. So for me personally, the big reason why I would rather teach Clojure to beginners in this context is like in a university setting, I think it's really good to teach Racket because you're getting people started in a language, and most of the time you're teaching like CS 101 or something like that. And there's this like base assumption that they're gonna take that class and then they're gonna keep on going through like a minor or like a major or something. So by the time that they finish their degree, they learn some other language. I think with Racket though, if you're trying to teach people who aren't in that kind of a setting where you're sort of like trying to introduce them to something, it is like there's more support for doing things in industry and stuff with Clojure. So if someone who's new to programming learns Clojure, they can at least like go to a meetup where people who work professionally as programmers are, and they have some like base thing that they can use to like associate with people's work and what they do professionally, if that makes sense.
What you said.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
It's kind of a question, maybe more of a suggestion. As someone brand new to programming, something that would also be helpful is getting a better idea of how the work world and different types of positions work. I guess that's not necessarily Clojure specific, though.
So to repeat, yeah.
Types of positions.
So to repeat what the person in the audience was saying, they mentioned that it would be useful also to have as part of the workshop, like introduce people to the different like positions and functions that people have, I guess, in industry when you're teaching them how to program, because it gives them some idea of like what careers and stuff that they could pursue later down the line, which I agree with and think is a very useful thing to do. Any other questions? Okay, then we are going to have an unsession tonight where you can come and we will sort of like organize people into groups depending on what kind of stuff they're interested in volunteering on and where they live. And you can come to that if you're interested.
You're more than welcome.
Yes. Yeah.